Hi, I'm Meredith, and I'm with Lewis Core for another discussion about GRAPA's fraud program. Hello, Lewis. It's great to have you back.
It's great to be back, Meredith.
So first, can you help me catch up any members new to this fraud series? Can you recap what we talked about in our last interview?
Yeah, what we talked about last time, basically, I introduced myself, we introduced Meredith, and we talked about GRAPA's Telecom Fraud Standards and really about the professionalization of the fraud function. We were talking about the professionals, who they are, what they do, and what they're like, and really what they need to know to be true professionals and for us really to certify them according to industry standards and according to our committee's recommendations for them.
Yes, I remember walking away being really excited about the steps GRAPA is taking to empower our fraud professionals. I was hoping we could use today to talk about curriculum development for the fraud program. I understand that we're launching an executive overview, a one-day program in Cape Town.
Absolutely. What we'll launch in Cape Town and what we'll also be doing in Chicago later this year is talk about GRAPA's global industry standards for telecoms fraud. Okay, talk about the KPIs and governance model implemented by successful fraud teams around the world. And what we're really trying to do is to give executives and managers some real clarity about how frauds can be prevented and detected, and for that to happen with confidence and integrity. Right? It's not just, oh yes, we've done something here and we hope it'll work. Provable, repeatable things that says, okay, yes, when I say this is under control and it's being protected, I mean it and it's real and we can prove it. Okay? And it's really about making sure that for you as an executive, that you are getting real and significant value from your fraud teams and from your investment in them.
So I'm listening to you describe this overview program, and if I'm a fraud manager or if I'm an executive, it sounds really interesting to me. Do you think there's anybody else who could benefit from attending?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly at the fraud manager level, this is very important. And more there seem to be director level positions that deal with fraud, maybe with revenue assurance or with something else. But as a lot of fraud teams start to report to finance, there are certainly CFOs who would benefit a great deal, and we've certainly had controllers who come in and say to us, okay, this is what I need in order to get control over my fraud function. Okay, and especially as internal audit tends to play a significant role when it comes to fraud prevention and detection and prosecution, head auditors are also coming and saying, okay, this is useful for me, this is something I need to know in order to help make sure that the fraud team is doing what they're doing with integrity. Okay, and really, the reason why this is the first day of our certification training as a whole is that even at the fraud analyst level, at the professional level, people need to understand this is how management views what you do, so that this is how, when you do your job, when you do your investigation, when you work with the fraud management system, this is how what you do fits in to what management is trying to get you to do.
Sounds very interesting. And just in a nutshell, what would you say students who attend will get from the class? What are the objectives?
Right. One of our mantras, one of the ways we put this in order to make it interesting and funny is to say that we don't want any more fraud protection voodoo. Okay. We don't want fraud to be thought of as some kind of black box that management throws money into that magically protects the telco from fraud, because that doesn't really happen. Okay, we've had people who come in and say, oh, but the fraud management system will deal with that. Yeah, okay, it'll deal with some things. It's not going to deal with this thing that has nothing to do with CDRs or with the fraud management system. Okay, so we want to move away from this magic model of fraud protection. Okay, and what GRAPA's fraud governance model lays out is how the fraud function really can be measured, tracked, rationalized, and prioritized. We want it to become a stable, understandable, repeatable process, not some mysterious thing that happens where budget and headcount goes in, but the results are never clear or quantifiable to management. And really what we're saying is that fraud investment has to equal fraud protection, okay? Where management gets real control over how much it spends on fraud because it knows exactly how much it's getting for that investment. I pay this much in fraud protection, I'm going to get this much protection, okay? You know that if you spend more, what you're going to get, and if you spend less, what kind of fraud risk you're going to take on, okay? And this is what happens when you have a controls-based rather than forensics-based approach to fraud protection. What we always like to say is that you get what you measure, and these KPIs are going to be based on prevention rather than just detection, Okay, we're talking about making the frauds not happen in the first place or be detected very early rather than just waiting to trip over them at the end.
I think what you're saying about the relationship between fraud and top management is key, and especially for an executive overview program, that's going to be a very interesting topic of discussion. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that key relationship and how this program can help make it a little bit.
Absolutely, because what we're really saying is that we want to put management and finance back in control of the fraud function. Okay, fraud governance basically turns fraud from a purely IT or investigative function. And don't get me wrong, those are important aspects of fraud. Okay, but we need to turn what we do, what we love doing, into something that top management and financial managers, especially the CFO and the controllers, who don't necessarily have a detailed background in fraud and fraud prevention or IT or investigation. Okay, something that they can understand and something that they can feel in control of and say, okay, I understand what I spent my money on, and I know if I spend more money, I'm going to get more of what I got or better. Okay, and the more I talk to fraud professionals, that's what they say they really want. Okay, I keep doing all this good stuff. I do all these things. I prevent all these frauds. I investigate them, but management doesn't understand what I do. Okay, as a fraud professional, you want your job to be understandable to management so that when you do good things, they say, oh, I see what you did there. That was good. I'm going to pay you to do more of that. Okay, and at the same time, that's exactly what management wants. They want to be able to be in control and say, good, I know what I'm getting for the investment that I made.
Louis, I love hearing that. It just sounds so rationalized and logical, and I think it's going to make sense to a lot of people. Can we quickly get into the nitty-gritty? What exactly can we expect from the modules in this program? Right,
because I know now that I've gotten you excited and you said, oh, yes, I can know exactly what I'm going to get for what I pay for. We need to step back and say, okay, yes, we want to end up talking about the fraud governance model, the KPIs, and the framework, but there are steps we need to take in order to get there, and we'll do it over the course of the day. Okay, we need to start out by understanding the nature of the fraud problem, why it's so specific to telecoms, and why it's so prevalent in telecoms because of the new product development process and all these things. We also need to understand how we can understand fraud in its most decomposed form, right? Not just as this big blob of fraud that happens, but we need to be able to map it out and say, okay, this is this exploit, this is this vulnerability, this is how we understand it in a way that is not just one big mass, okay? And that's what our fraud mapping methodology is about. When it comes to controlling fraud, it's actually relatively simple. There are only really 6 standard control methods you're going to be able to use in order to control fraud, and we talk about those. And once you understand those, it's just a matter of applying them in different situations, okay? That really is the basis of our fraud standards and our fraud principles. And the reason why we talk about a principles-based approach to a profession and to fraud in this case is whenever you're dealing with new things, if you have a set of principles and standards by which you approach everything you do, whenever there's something new, you say, okay, I'm going to apply those things that I've done with everything else, and it's going to work, because that's how this works. It's a logical function. Whether it's new or not doesn't matter, okay? And because in telecoms, everything is new all the time, that's particularly important, okay? So we talk about that. We talk about our incident and case management life cycles, and we talk more generally about the fraud life cycle and forensics, corrections, and compliance in terms of how that works in. Because once we get there, we're almost there, okay? Then we can talk about our governance model, our KPIs, and our framework, and really lock it in to make sure that, okay, this is something management can understand based on the things that they've learned throughout the day.
Well, Louis, this course sounds like it can truly help those in telecoms fraud. I look forward to hearing stories about it once the program gets rolling. For those listeners that are interested, this course will pilot in Cape Town in May and run again in Chicago in June. If you would like more information, please visit telecomfraud.org, and look forward to us talking with Louis next week on our 3-day Telco Vice Quick Start program.